How did I find Northwest Arkansas? Well, I'll step backwards for a second and say that while I study cities, what I like to study are clusters. And clusters, there are two kinds of clusters. A bunch of cities that are next to each other, right? And then cities that are in a line, so they're on a freeway. One of my most popular articles is this paper that I wrote, I think it was in 2018, and it was about corridors in the United States. So I mentioned to people that, people say things like, Austin is a great city to invest in. I agree, it's a great city to invest in. But you know what's more interesting, if you really look at it, is when you track things, you realize that it isn't Austin. It's a bunch of cities. And Austin is one of those cities. And the growth is running along a freeway. And that freeway happens to run from the city of San Antonio, through the city of New Braunfels, through the city of San Marcos, to the city of Austin, and then running north all the way to a tiny military town called Killeen. What I try and do is when I see in my numbers that there's a city going up, and it's a city that I don't really know, something interesting that's happening like Grand Rapids, Michigan, I then become interested in learning, I want to see what else comes up next month close to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Maybe it's Ann Arbor. Maybe it's, is it Detroit? Something interesting is happening, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. What happened with Northwest Arkansas is Rogers, which is one of the cities, came up, and it stayed up there for months. And I'm looking at Rogers. Firstly, like most Americans, I have this feeling of Arkansas. I mean, a bunch of fields, Arkansas. The only thing I knew about was Little Rock, and Rogers is hours away. And then I noticed a city called Fayetteville popped up, and it started to pop up. And now Rogers and Fayetteville are competing. And then a few months later, I noticed Bentonville. And so I'm like, how far are these cities from each other? Well, I realized Rogers is only 5 miles from Bentonville, and it's 12 miles from Fayetteville. Then I realized there's a regional effect, and I love regional effects. So I'm like, what other cities are here? So I Google all of those cities, and then I'm like, oh, they're all going up in my charts, right? All at the same time. There's something incredible happening. And that's when I basically start marking those cities, and I have staff that helps me with this process. And it's like, this is one to watch. And then over the next 3 months, we're trying to figure out, why are these cities on fire? There's always a story, right? I'll give you an example of a different story so you understand what happened in Northwest Arkansas as well. Carson City in Nevada started to come up in my numbers. Then a few months later, Reno started to come up. And so I Google it and I realized, well, Carson City is about 30 miles away from Reno. And I'm like, this is interesting. Why is Reno special? What is causing this? And I came to realize something, and I've coined a phrase for this, that Reno is the cheapest Californian city in Nevada. It is the cheapest Californian city in Nevada. Because you have all these rich Californians, they're fed up with the ridiculous tax regime and all the problems that California causes for entrepreneurs. And they're like, where's the nearest place that I can go to without really leaving my home in California? Because not everyone runs away from California. That's just Fox News stuff. We like California. I like California, right? I don't necessarily like all the stuff that goes on in California, but I love living there. So I'm not going to just run away. But if I just, I like skiing. I go to Tahoe. Well, as it happens, Reno is right next to Tahoe, and now I don't have to deal with, ridiculously high property taxes. I don't have to deal with sales taxes. Nevada is a very friendly state, so I start looking at Reno. And as I start looking at Reno, I realize, things are expensive in Reno, and well, Carson City is next to that. So here's the story of Carson City. Carson City currently has the highest venture capital or VC investment per capita of any city in the United States. And you would never think that about Carson City, right? You'd think that, it would be the San Francisco Bay Area, or it would be Boston. Well, yeah, there's a lot of tech in both of those places, but per capita is the magic, right? There's millions of people living in San Francisco Bay Area, millions in Boston. Carson City has a small number of people, but a large amount of investment. Why? Because those VCs, they live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they have homes in Tahoe. And so they go there on Friday, and they stop on Sunday on the way back, and they have a satellite office in Carson City. And so I look at investing in Carson City and Reno, and I realize there is a huge gap between the amount of money pouring into this area and what property values are like. I think that the Reno Carson City Metro might see a $150,000 to $200,000 increase in home prices over the next 3 years. And that is just California exporting its prices. I love Utah and I love investing in Utah. And what's really happened in Utah is Californians have exported our home prices to Utah. We're doing it to Nevada. We're doing it to Idaho. We're doing it to Washington State, right? And the amount of money in California is so massive. California is the 5th largest economy in the world, right? Not just in the US, in the world. And so when that economy starts to export its money because we're fed up with all the stuff that's happening, those knock-on effects can create incredible profits, like VCs opening satellite offices in Carson City. And the Walton family deciding that our philanthropy is going to be tied to Northwest Arkansas, or Walmart saying, I think we're going to be more efficient if we bring all the middle management into one area. That's what quants like us do. We look at the data and then we figure out real things tied to that data.